am Pick, and thank you for joining me in Running to Write, where I give questionable writing advice through running metaphors. We are far enough into the race that I have trimmed down the clothes I started with. I tend to overheat when I run, so if it's at about freezing, I'll have removed my hat and gloves. If it's 40 or above, I'm already down to my t-shirt. At that point, there isn't much in the way of clothing to remove. So I basically melt in the summer. When the temperature does hit triple digits though, I break out the short shorts. So if you live anywhere near me, you've been warned. Anywho, after all that forward momentum in the previous episode about outlining, I'm going to jump ahead to trimming those novels. Let's say you finish the first draft of your manuscript. Means you're ready for publication, right? Not even close. If you're anything like me, you are hundreds of thousands of words over a reasonable limit and have a doorstop in the making. Today is not about editing. This is about chopping sometimes significant portions from the story. Don't think of this as losing character moments and fun details within your story. Think of it as removing excess words to streamline and better accentuate the core of what you're trying to tell. Here are my top 7 things to cut. Number 1, weak words. These words are often overused, and there are better replacements to level up your sentences. To quote the late Robin Williams from the movie Dead Poets Society,
"A man is not very tired, he is exhausted. And don't use very sad use. Come on, Mr. Overstreet, you twerp."
Morose?
Exactly, morose.
I found 2 great cheat sheets for words to use instead of very, and I'll post the links in the description below. In many cases, the word that is empty, and readers will skip over it. Without context clues or additional formatting, there is no difference between the following sentences. She knew that he was lying, and she knew he was lying. There are instances where you can change the meaning of a sentence by highlighting specific words. For example, she knew that he was lying versus she knew he was lying. The weak words very and that may be used within dialogue so that it sounds natural. However, they shouldn't be used when describing the setting or within the narration itself because there are better alternatives. In terms of cutting those meaningless words, the solution is not to abuse the system. Don't simply replace the phrase, "the character was very angry," with "the character was furious." That doesn't solve the problem of telling us exactly how a character feels. The sentence could be rewritten to show us how the character's face turned red until it matched the color of a tomato as his voice reached the volume of a speeding subway train. I like the visuals in the second example much better. Instances of weak words can be justified, but should be used sparingly and when expressly intended. Number 2, crutch words. For anyone who was expecting adverbs to make the list, here you go. I recognize that very is an adverb, but I wanted to keep very and that as their own item. The following words are implied and add little to no additional meaning within sentences. Just, barely, almost, completely, quickly, quietly, suddenly, definitely, perhaps, literally, and maybe. I hope I didn't repeat any of those. Also, only is a word used sparingly, and I know I overused the hell out of it here. The door suddenly opened. Wouldn't it be sudden for the reader too? I almost tripped and fell down a hill. Well, I was almost interested in that action. Number 3, swampy middles. These are the middle chapters where it feels like characters are stumbling through a swamp. They meander their way to the climax where the story picks up again. If you're bored when writing a swampy middle, then readers will be at a high risk of being bored when reading those same sections. In an early story I wrote, my characters didn't really come together until the 3rd act. I included a lot of development and growth where not much happened except getting the characters to the next action scene. This made the exciting 1st act feel like a drop-off point as the story became stagnant during the rising action, which is the exact opposite goal of what you want. At the time, I believed those chapters were necessary, but didn't honestly like them. I considered writing the book out of order so that we bounce from exciting chapter to character development. That solved the wrong problem, and I'm glad I didn't do it. In addition to becoming more confusing, this wouldn't have solved the problem of making those middle chapters any less boring. All it would have done is rearrange them and intersperse more action scenes. Removing those sections felt like I was hamstringing the wonderful story that I wanted to tell. In the end though, I went with my instincts and chopped it. An author can feel when their characters and story are resonating. Likewise, they can understand when the story drags or is filling up a word count. As a practice exercise, consider removing your own troublesome sections. Scrap the material and rewrite it in a different manner. This can help you breathe life into chapters which otherwise deserve to be removed. Number 4, excess language. A lot of purple prose can feel out of place depending on the narrator or how it's used. When there is a sudden moment of wonderful language amid chapters with standard descriptions, I get pulled out of the story. I've read stories with child narrators where they were conveying complex concepts with extreme intelligence and the emotional comprehension of an adult genius. The author aged up their narrator to match with their intended audience, and I roll my eyes at all the pages that could have reasonably been cut. Likewise, when a story continually smacks me in the face with beautiful language, I tend to skim right over it. The subjects of the excessive prose tend to be one-off scenes showing us the landscape's grandeur, a gratuitous moment of violence, or descriptions of a character we're supposed to be surprised to discover is the villain. I'm not saying to never use purple prose for important people, places, and events within the story. I am concerned with how overly verbose language is used to convey simple concepts which could have been shortened to a word or two. Some authors have the skills to pull this off. Others don't. In a previous episode, my example of Terry Pratchett's purple prose from The Lost Continent worked because we were watching the formation of that story's setting. I would expect the geographic forces to create an island to be extreme and cataclysmic. In other words, I want purple prose. I put down a different book because the moment a character was introduced, I knew they were the villain. I went back and finished reading that novel, and I groaned whenever that character was unaccounted for as the body count kept rising. Inconsistent prose revealed the twist during the status quo chapters and degraded the overall story. Trimming a little bit of the purple prose would have gone a long way to improving the story. Number 5, weak events. Go over every plot point and chapter to find parts that are repeated, or details which the readers may not explicitly need to be told. When I was considering massive cuts to make for an early manuscript, I settled on a training montage right before the final battle. I pushed this to a planned sequel and ultimately scrapped it. The purpose of those chapters were to show the characters evolving and improving their capabilities and learning to trust one another. You know what was better? When I removed those 50,000 words and transformed the final battle into a mess. The characters were exhausted and they didn't work well with each other. Over the course of the final battle though, they learned to coordinate and compensate for each other's weaknesses. By removing the weak events of a team being gradually built, I threw my characters into a crucible and forced them to work together. Number 6, feedback. Writers are too close to their own material, so we rely on beta readers. When working with beta readers, have them mark sections which felt boring or seemed to drag on too long. This can lead to discussions on whether those sections can be dropped altogether. Actively making a case to keep something in your story will help you strengthen the moments where others weren't as emotionally invested. The first time I submitted to a public forum, it came back with giant red X's on every page. I was inexperienced enough that I started that chapter with the main character waking up. They then went to the mirror and described their physical traits. There was also a moment where they had a mid-chapter dream sequence prophecy. Oof. Those were 3 of the many things that reviewers marked to fix. I'm glad I never made any very bad mistakes like that again. I completely dodged that mess once and for all. Had this episode been reviewed by beta readers, they would have warned me against the tangent you just heard. And lastly, number 7, telling, not showing. This will be a little different, as I recommend you remove instances of telling the audience information and replace it with showing. Be mindful when telling readers descriptions of characters. Early phrases to look out for might be, "This is Alice. We've been best friends since we were kids." Other instances of telling us character descriptions might include how she has a lighthearted personality, stunning good looks, and charisma for miles. Those are important pieces of information to give readers, however, they are better conveyed through actions. Maybe the narrator is having a rough start to their day, and seeing their best friend immediately brightens their mood. Starting with a high five, they goof around with each other, showing how they naturally interact. If this is a military story, they might punch each other's arms. If it's romantic, they could listen to each other's woes. If it's a thriller, one person might ask the other to bring a shovel and not ask any questions. Those examples demonstrate that 2 people are close friends without explicitly telling the reader. There you have my 7 strategies for what to chop from a story. I am Ben Pick, and thank you for joining me in Running to Write. What is your record for greatest number of words chopped from a story? My unofficial amount has to be well over 200,000, and that story has never seen the light of day. Let me know in the comments what strategies you use to trim words. If you enjoyed this content, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Join the Running to Write community on all social media to share your thoughts. See you next time. Until then, chisel away at those words until you find the fantastic marble sculpture within your manuscript.